One of the scariest things that can happen to us in our lives is suddenly being taken somewhere and completely disappearing off the face of the earth. In the eyes of everyone, we simply just vanished and no one knows where we went. Police do their best to try to find us, most of the time, but sometimes cases are just left unsolved. And for this year, for our Halloween special, we're going to be taking a look at the Unsolved Mysteries/Murders Iceberg and explain through the levels on what they mean and how they are part of the Unsolved Iceberg. Welcome everyone, my name is Juby Scott and welcome to our Halloween special Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg Explained. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer that was active in London during 1888. Many crimes were committed against women, including murder and almost disembowelment from this killer. The reason that it's on this iceberg is that the identity of Jack the Ripper was never founded. There are even some cases where people believe it was a woman, since a lot of the women that were killed were prostitutes at the time. One of the most interesting sources we've gotten so far, I don't know if it's confirmed yet, is that it is to believe that Jack the Ripper was a cop, which is how he knew the police routes and how he was able to avoid the police during that time. One of the interesting things that Jack the Ripper would do was that Jack would actually send letters to the police in the police district, basically taunting them, and he would sign it himself as Jack the Ripper. Unfortunately at this time, and probably we will never know, the identity of Jack the Ripper has never been founded. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is an unidentified serial killer who operated in Northern Carolina in the late 1960s. The case has been described as the most famous unsolved murder case in American history, becoming a fixture of popular culture and inspiring amateur detectives to attempt to resolve it. The Zodiac has confirmed 5 known murders in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. Very similar to Jack the Ripper, the Zodiac Killer would also send letters to the police, basically taunting them. One interesting thing about the Zodiac Killer is that the police were looking for the killer and they actually walked by him. One of the officers did actually believe that it was a Zodiac Killer that they just walked by, judging from the composite sketch. Unfortunately, they put out an APB looking for a black fellow. The Zodiac Killer was aware of this and sent a letter in the following day, basically telling them that they walked right by him and didn't even know. The Zodiac Killer stopped writing to the police in 1974, and the identity of the killer hasn't been found since. The Murder of the Grind Sisters. The Murder of the Grind Sisters is an unsolved double murder that occurred in Chicago, Illinois on December 28, 1956, in which 2 sisters named Barbara and Patricia Grind, aged 15 and 12, disappeared while traveling from Brighton Park Movie Theater to their home in McKinley Park. Their disappearance is one of the largest missing persons investigations in the history of Chicago. The girls' nude bodies were discovered alongside a deserted road in Willow Springs on January 22, 1957. Although the girls' autopsies report came back as they were murdered within 5 hours of their last confirmed sighting, no killer was ever charged and no one has ever been found for this murder. This case is also acknowledged as one of the most labor-intensive missing person and murder investigations in Cook County, and remains one of Chicago's most infamous cold cases. O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson's on this iceberg because of his wife Goldman and Brown. Because the way the trial went during the time, there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of racial gap. While everyone in the U.S. observed the same evidence as the jury, there were a lot of people that believed that this was a racial move. They were just trying to pin it on O.J. Simpson just because he was black. Because of this, it became a very strange mystery with how O.J. Simpson was reacting and all sorts of things. However, most recent polling shows the gap has narrowed since the trial, with over half of polled black respondents in 2013 stating they believed that Simpson was guilty. Unfortunately, at the time being, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, and for all we know, we just let a man get away with a double murder. Bob Crane. Robert Edward Crane was an American actor, drummer, radio personality, and disc jockey known for starring in the CBS situation comedy Hogan's Heroes. Crane's career declined after Hogan's Heroes. He became frustrated with the few roles that he was being offered and began performing in dinner theater. On one night in June 1978, Crane was found bludgeoned to death in his Scottsdale, Arizona apartment while on tour. The homicide remains officially unsolved. His previously uncontroversial public image suffered due to the suspicious nature of his death. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. The Tunguska Event. The Tunguska Event was a 12-megaton explosion that occurred near Russia on the morning of June 30th, 1908. The explosion over the sparsely populated eastern Siberian taiga flattened an estimated 80 million trees over an area of 830 square miles of forest. An eyewitness report suggests that at least 3 people may have died in this event. The explosion is generally attributed to a meteor airburst, but unfortunately there was no crater from the asteroid to be found. Because of this, no one knows if Russia fired a missile onto the town or if a meteor actually did hit the area. Tupac Shakur was an American rapper who was shot on September 7, 1996 in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas, Nevada. He was 25 years old. The shooting occurred at 11:15 p.m. Tupac was struck by 4 .40 caliber rounds fired from a Glock, 2 in the chest, 1 in the arm, and 1 in the thigh. He died from his wounds 6 days later. While no one was ever charged for the murder of Tupac, there was a lot of people that believed that the murder of the Notorious B.I.G. 6 months later was connected. Glitches in reality. Glitches in reality is stuff that occurs that cannot easily be explained. Best way to show examples of this is I will read you 2 stories about people who have encountered glitches in reality. I once found a ring in a cemetery. It had clearly been dropped and was not on any grave, so I took it and my mom posted about it on Facebook. Nobody ever claimed it, so I kept it. It wasn't fancy, just a dark metal with a small eye-like pattern. It was always cold to the touch and had no gems. One day, I lost it at school. I was super sad about it because I had gotten attached to it and worn it every day. So, I told my mom that I lost it, and she promised to look for it as she worked at the school as a cleaner. We had not been outside that day, so it had to be inside. I got home that day, and guess what was on my bed? The damn ring. Of course I was happy, but in the back of my mind I was confused, because I knew I put it on. My mom came home 2 hours later, and guess what she found? My ring. I now had 2 identical rings. She found it in my classroom near my desk. I still have both rings, but refused to wear them. When I was 5, I was playing in my room while my mom was cooking dinner downstairs. My toys were always on a really high shelf that I couldn't reach alone, so I needed my mom to get them for me. I shouted down to her to get me one of my toys, but she said that I had to wait a little until she could come upstairs. I waited like 5 minutes before I decided to try to get them myself. I was jumping and trying to grab it, but I still couldn't reach. That was until I started floating. This sounds so stupid to write down, but I remember it. I reached the toy and started playing with it. After a few more minutes, my mom came up and saw I had the toy. She asked me how I managed to get it, and I told her I floated. She didn't believe me, but none of us would have any explanation of how else I could have gotten it. So as you can see, it's phenomenons that either replicate itself, or you're suddenly lag switching and going somewhere that you couldn't actually access. The Red Room. The Red Room is a website on the deep web that apparently people can go and place bets or gamble on how to kill a certain individual in a room. These can range from some of the most heartbreaking events you can think of, or anything of that sort. These people would pay in Bitcoin and would essentially pay to watch someone get tortured. To this day, there hasn't been a recorded incident of the Red Room being a real thing. A lot of people believe that it's not real, but we can only explore the deep web so long, and clearly this had to have come from somewhere. So is it real? The Notorious B.I.G. Christopher Wallace, an American rapper known professionally as the Notorious B.I.G., was murdered in a drive-by shooting in the early hours of March 9, 1997, in L.A., California. He was 24 years old. Retired LAPD officer Greg Cadling alleged that Marion Surge Knight, the head of Death Row Records, orchestrated the murder in revenge for the September 1996 murder of Tupac in a similar drive-by homicide by gunshot. Media reports had previously speculated that Wallace was in some way connected to Tupac's murder, though no evidence ever surfaced to seriously implicate him. Shortly after Wallace's death, Los Angeles Times writer Chuck Phillips and Matt Light reported that the key suspect in this murder was a member of the Southside Crips acting out of a personal financial motive, rather than on the gang's behalf. The investigation stalled, however, and no one was ever formally charged. Elisa Lam. On February 19, 2013, the body of a Chinese-Canadian tourist, Elisa Lam, was recovered from a large system atop the Stay on Main Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, where she had been a guest. She was last seen alive on January 31st and was reported missing by her parents on February 1st. Before the disappearance, there was a hotel's elevator security footage that showed Elisa Lam entering an elevator but looking very concerned, as if she was being followed. Once she exited the elevator, this was the last known footage of Elisa Lam alive. After that, guests on the Stay on Main Hotel started complaining about the color and smell of their tap water. Once someone went out to investigate the large cistern atop of the Stay on Main Hotel, Elisa Lam's body was discovered to be inside, drowning and naked. The reason this would be on the Iceberg is that no one knows what happened to Elisa Lam to get her in there. The cistern cover was extremely hard to open for someone like her, and unfortunately there is no suspects on who could have murdered Elisa Lam. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Pass Incident was an event in which 9 Soviet trekkers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and February 2nd, 1959, certain circumstances. The experienced trekking group had established camp on the eastern slopes in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tents and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had been killed by physical trauma. 1 victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of these 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. Numerous theories have been put forward to account for the unexplained deaths, including animal attacks, hypothermia, an avalanche, winds, infrasound-induced panic, military involvement, or some combination of these factors. Russia opened a new investigation into the incident in 2019, and its conclusions were presented in July 2020 that an avalanche had led to their deaths. Survivors had been forced to suddenly leave their camp in low visibility conditions with inadequate clothing, and had died of hypothermia. Now this is what Russia's saying. There's a bunch of theories that something scared these trekkers to make them cut out of their tents and start running away. Another big theory is that the abominable snowman had actually attacked them. Another theory is that a large creature had attacked their campsite, hence why they left in inadequate clothing and basically had physical trauma to their body. One of the biggest theories on that is this was an attack by the abominable snowman. The Black Dahlia murder case. On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a mother taking her child for a walk in the Los Angeles neighborhood stumbled upon a gruesome sight. The body of a young naked woman sliced clean in half at the waist. The body was just a few feet from the sidewalk and posed in such a way that the mother reportedly thought it was a mannequin at first sight. Despite the extensive mutilation and cuts on the body, there wasn't a drop of blood at the scene, indicating that the young woman had been killed elsewhere. The ensuing investigation was led by the LA Police Department. The FBI was asked to help, and it quickly identified the body, just 56 minutes in fact, after getting blurred fingerprints via sound photo from Los Angeles. The young woman turned out to be the 22-year-old Hollywood hopeful named Elizabeth Short, later dubbed the Black Dahlia by the press for her rumored penchant for sheer black clothes and for the Blue Dahlia movie out at the time. Based on the early suspicions that the murderer may have had skills in dissection because the body was so cleanly cut, agents were also asked to check out a group of students at the University of Southern California Medical School. And, in a tantalizing potential break in the case, the Bureau searched for a match to fingerprints found on the anonymous letter that may have been sent to authorities by the killer, but the prints weren't in FBI files. Who killed the Black Dahlia, and why, is a mystery. The murderer has never been found, and given how much time has passed, probably never will be. Section 2. Art Heist at the Gardner Museum. The 1990 theft of 13 works of art from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum's collection remains unsolved. Although the museum's commitment to resolving the crime has never diminished since its occurrence 31 years ago, the museum, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office are still seeking viable leads that could result in the safe return of the art. In the early morning hours of March 18, 1990, 13 works of art were stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Guards admitted 2 men posing as police officers responding to a disturbance call, and the thieves tied the guards up and looted the museum over the next hour. The case is unsolved, no arrests have been made, and no works have been recovered. The stolen works have been valued at hundreds of millions of dollars by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and art dealers. The FBI believes that the robbery was planned by a criminal organization. The case lacks strong physical evidence, and the FBI has largely depended on interrogations, undercover informants, and sting operations to collect information. Unfortunately, no artwork has been found. This next case is very special to me because this case is actually what got me into looking up unsolved mysteries throughout the years. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey. JonBenet Patricia Ramsey was born August 6, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia, U.S. On December 26, 1996 in the morning, JonBenet's parents went to go wake her up and found that she wasn't in her bed. They started searching throughout the house and found that JonBenet Ramsey was found in the closet in the basement, found dead. She had sustained a broken skull from a blow to the head and had been strangled. A garrote was found tied around her neck. An investigation was launched for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Footprints were found outside leading to the house, but no footprints were found leaving the house. Because of this, it was suspected that JonBenet's older brother, mother, and father were the possible murderers. Unfortunately, not enough evidence was founded by these three, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Who is D.B. Cooper? D.B. Cooper was an unidentified man who hijacked a Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727 aircraft operated by Northwest Orient Airlines. D.B. Cooper told the flight attendant that he was armed with a bomb, demanded $200,000 in ransom, and requested 4 parachutes upon landing in Seattle. After releasing the passengers in Seattle, the hijacker instructed the flight crew to refuel the aircraft and to begin a second flight to Mexico City, with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. Approximately 30 minutes after taking off from Seattle, the hijacker opened the aircraft's aft door, deployed the staircase, and parachuted into the night over southwestern Washington. The hijacker was never identified, apprehended, or found. The hijacker identified himself as Dan Cooper, but because of a reporter's mistake, became known as D.B. Cooper. The money and the man haven't been found to this day. The Icebox Murders. On the evening of June 23, 1965, Houston Police Captain Charles Bullock and his partner L.M. Barta were dispatched to the home of Fred and Edwin Rogers for a welfare check. Edwina's nephew, Marvin Martin, hadn't heard from his aunt for a worrying amount of time. Their knock was met with silence, so the two police officers went around the back of the house. They found a makeshift barricade of flower pots obstructing the back door, which made Bullock suspicious. When he and Barta pushed inside and entered the kitchen, his suspicions shifted into adrenaline. He later remembered that something just didn't feel right inside the Rogers home. "I don't know why I looked in the refrigerator," he said. "For some reason, I just opened it." At first, Bullock and Barta thought they were seeing was hog meat. Then they looked down. There, in the vegetable drawer, were two decapitated human heads. Edwina had been shot in the head, Fred had been bludgeoned with a hammer, but the killer has gone above and beyond simply killing the Rogers. He also dismembered the couple, removed Fred's genitals, and flushed Fred's intestines down the toilet. Quickly, the investigation into the Icebox murders pivoted to a single suspect, the couple's 42-year-old son Charles. Charles Roger lived with his parents, there was blood on the keyhole of his door, and he was nowhere to be found. A nationwide search to find him, however, yielded nothing. Authorities even checked the local airfields as Rogers learned how to fly while serving in the Navy. He was officially declared dead in 1975. But the mystery didn't die with him. Indeed, some suspect that Charles Rogers did much more than kill his parents, and that he might have been involved in the plot to kill John F. Kennedy. The reason for killing his parents is unknown, but it is suspected to be that Charles Rogers' parents uncovered his diaries, which went in detail on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. When he found out his parents had discovered this, he went ahead and killed them. In the end, if Rogers did manage to kill his parents and disappear, his theoretical work for the CIA isn't as outlandish as it seems. After all, he left not a single trace, completed the mission, and vanished like a ghost. The Smiling Stones. I tried looking this up, and I hope this is the correct thing, but if it's not, I do apologize. The Smiling Stones are a series of strange card stones found in central Massachusetts that are baffling researchers. So far, 4 out of 5 of these granite stones have been found. The stones have been described as being made of granite and ranging from 6 to 25 pounds. They all possess odd smiley faces with deep sunken eyes and wide grinning mouths. These faces do not appear to have been carved by hand, but rather chipped away by other stones. One of the theories is that this was simply Native American art. Unfortunately, local Native American tribes have stated that the stones are not their doing. So what caused these? Asha Degree Disappearance. Asha Degree Disappearance. Asha was born on August 5, 1990, went missing at the age of 9 from Shelby, North Carolina, United States. In the early morning hours of February 14, 2000, for reasons unknown, she packed her book bag and left her family home north of the city and began walking along nearby North Carolina highway, despite heavy rain and wind. Several passing motorists reported seeing her. One passerby began to approach her. She left the roadside and ran into a wooded area. In the morning, her parents discovered her missing from her bedroom. No one has seen her since. An intensive search that began the day led to the location of some of her personal effects near where she was last just seen. A year and a half later, her book bag, still packed, was unearthed from a construction site along the Highway 18, north of Shelby in Morganton. At the point where she ran into the woods, a billboard now stands, appealing for help finding her. Her family hosts an annual walk from their home to the billboard to draw attention to the case. While the circumstances of Degree's disappearance at first seemed to suggest she was just simply running away from home, investigators could not find a clear reason she might have done so. She was younger than most children who do. They had speculated that she might have been abducted instead. The case has drawn national media attention. In 2015, the FBI joined state and county authorities in a reopened investigation, offering a reward for information that could help solve the case. Unfortunately, the status of Degree is she's been missing for 22 years, 7 months, and 27 days. The Smiley Face murders. From the late 1920s to the 2010s, several young men were found dead in bodies of water across the Midwestern American states. At first, this was believed to be a bunch of drownings, but it was concluded by law enforcement agencies that they were victims of serial killer or killers. The term Smiley Face became connected to the alleged murders when it was made public that the police had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near locations where they think the killer dumped the bodies, in at least a dozen of the cases. Jameson family deaths. On October 8, 2009, the Jameson family in Oklahoma, United States, Bobby, Sherilyn, and their daughter Madison Jameson mysteriously disappeared. 4 years after the family was missing, two hunters in a remote spot of Latimer County in November 2013 found the family's pickup truck that had been abandoned. 3 miles away from the pickup truck, the skeletal remains of two adults and a child were discovered. No one understands what happened to the Jameson family, but the theories have gone from owing money to a crime family or being heavily into drugs and going to a deal. The creepiness about this is that if it was a drug deal, why would the parents bring Madison along with them? Elaine Nix. Jacqueline Elaine Nix was 18 years old when her body was found on September 29, 1999, the victim of an unsolved homicide. On September 20th, 1999, Elaine Nix pulled over to use the payphone at Zach's Food Rack convenience store on Chandler Road in Hall County. She called her boyfriend. Right after that call, Elaine vanished, but her car was left behind in the parking lot. Her key was in the ignition, her purse was in the back seat. 9 days later, on September 29th, Elaine's body was found about 17 miles away in some woods just over the county line, in the Beaufort area of Gwinnett County. Her clothes were missing, but her jewelry was on her body. The investigation was at a dead end. The Hinterkaifeck Massacre. On March 31st, 1922, 6 inhabitants of a small Bavarian farmstead, located north of Germany, were murdered by an unknown assailant. The 6 victims were Andreas Gruber, Kazilla Gruber, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabrielle, Victoria's children Kazilla and Joseph, and the maid Maria Baumgartner. They were all found struck dead. The perpetrator or perpetrators lived with the 6 corpses of their victims for 3 days. The murders are considered to be one of the most gruesome and puzzling unsolved crimes in German history. 4 of the dead bodies were stacked up in the barn. The victims had been lured there one by one. Prior to the incident, the family had their previous maid reported hearing strange sounds coming from the attic, which led that maid to quit. The case remains unsolved to this day. Ida Lowry. On April 23, 1960, at about 12:30 a.m., Edwin Smith was driving home, heading north along North Plankinton Avenue. As he passed the 400 block between Syborn and St. Paul Avenues, he heard a woman crying out for help. He stopped his car and he rushed into a nearby alley. There, he found 76-year-old Ida Lowry badly beaten and covered in blood. He tried to lift the poor woman, but she screamed in agony. He ran off and phoned the police. Just over an hour, the woman died at a nearby hospital. The murder of Ida Lowry was one of the most horrific crimes in the city's recent memory. She had been grabbed off the street, she was beaten and sexually assaulted with a blunt object, and left in the dirt to die. Talking to police, she could only say that her assailant had been a big white man who works at a bridge. She estimated that she had been laid in the alley for about 15 minutes between the attack and Smith happening upon her. She could provide no other information about the crime. The search for her killer began after she passed away. Officers combed the alleyway where she was found looking for clues, but came up with very little to any use. Beyond her vague description, there was nothing to indicate who had committed the awful act. In trying to piece together a profile of who Ida Lowry was, the police encountered even more mysteries. The Bloop. In 1997, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, recorded a sound underwater west of South America. Here is the sound now. It was suspected to be a creature of unknown size that was able to create such a loud blooping noise. While in the recording it wasn't loud, according to scientists, this bloop was caught from 5,000 kilometers away from the underwater microphones. Unfortunately, this remained a mystery on what caused it, but as of 2012, many scientists agree that they believe it was just simply an ice wake, or a giant piece of an iceberg just shifting in the water. But not everyone agrees that it's that simple. The Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified American serial killer active in New Orleans, Louisiana. From May 1918 to October 1919, Italian immigrants and Italian Americans were targeted by this mysterious Axeman. The Axeman was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. Some believe that the Axeman started their murders as early as 1911, as the murders were very similar to murders that happened in 1911, as well as some murders in Germany in 1922. The victims were usually attacked with an axe, which actually often belonged to the victims themselves. In most cases, a panel on the back door of a home was removed by a chisel, which along with the panel was left on the floor near the door. The intruder then attacked one or more of the residents with either an axe or a straight razor. The crimes were not motivated by robbery, and the perpetrator never removed items from his victim's home. His crime spree stopped as mysteriously as it started. The murderer's identity remains unknown to this day, although various possible identifications of varying plausibility has been proposed. On March 13, 1919, a letter purporting to be from the Axeman has published in newspapers, saying that he would kill again at 15 minutes past midnight on the night of March 19th, but would spare the occupants of any place where a jazz band was playing. That night, all of New Orleans dance halls were filled at capacity, and professional and amateur bands played jazz at parties at hundreds of houses around town. There were no murders that night. Jenny Lo Chang. Jenny was last seen alive by her roommate on Sunday, September 11, 1977. Around 6 p.m. that night, she said she was going to the library to use one of their study rooms to get some work done. Only the basement level of the library was open at that time, and the study area there being open until 11 p.m. that night. No one present at the library of the night of September 11, 1977 remembers seeing Jenny, and she never returned to her dorm room. Her roommate reported her missing the next morning. When she realized Jenny was still gone at the library, a psychology professor entered a faculty reading room on the 4th floor where he made a horrific discovery. Jenny's nude, lifeless body was inside. She had been stabbed 30 times and beaten with a standing ashtray. Other sources claimed that she was strangled and that there was evidence of sexual assault. Her belongings were found in a neat pile nearby. The internet has run a little wild with theories on this case. The first suspect that comes up is often the infamous Zodiac Killer. This serial killer was never caught, and their identity is still unknown today. We know they were allegedly in correspondence with the police in the 60s and 70s, and their confirmed victims were all killed in the Bay Area. Their MOs was typically to brutally stab or shoot their victims. That does loosely fit here, but it should be noted that all the Zodiac's confirmed victims were killed in the 1960s, unless the Zodiac Killer happened to be a student or a staff member at SFSU. I don't see this theory as fitting. According to the contemporary reports, only 400 people had a key to the room in which Jenny was discovered. This considerably narrowed down suspects, but it was not ruled out that the door was left ajar or propped open to allow unrestricted access. Students and faculty were questioned, but no one saw or heard a thing. Jenny had no known enemies, nothing had seemed wrong at the time. Soon, the leads ran dry, and the case went cold. Father John Kerrigan. On August 5th, 1982, the Reverend Father John Patrick Kerrigan had served as a priest in Plains, Montana, before being transferred to the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Ronan on July 18th, 1984. On the evening of July 20th, 2 days after Kerrigan's arrival and appointment in the church, he left a bakery in downtown Ronan. This was the last time he was seen. Kerrigan failed to report for his 6:30 a.m. Mass on July 21st, and a missing person report was filed on July 23rd. On July 29th, articles of bloody clothing were found lying alongside Montana Highway 35 on the shores of Flathead Lake near Polson. Along with a bloodied coat hanger, these items were located roughly 5 miles from Ronan. On July 30th, Kerrigan's vehicle, a brown Chevrolet Malibu, was discovered abandoned several miles away. In the trunk, his wallet, which contained $1,200 was found, along with a blood-stained shovel and pillowcase. Though Kerrigan's remains have never been recovered, he is believed to have been murdered. Because of this, and very lack of evidence, his killer has not been found, and the case went immediately cold. Cindy Song. Cindy Song grew up in South Korea in 1995. She moved to Virginia to live with her aunt and uncle and to attend high school. After graduating, she went to Pennsylvania State University. On Halloween 2001, she, now a senior, went to a costume party at the Players nightclub with two close friends, Stacy Pike and Lisa Kim. She was dressed as a Playboy bunny. All three partied until 2 a.m. the next morning, where they left and stopped off at a friend's apartment to play video games. At 4 a.m., they dropped Cindy off at her apartment. She was never seen again. A search of Cindy's apartments found no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The false eyelashes she had worn to the party were there, along with her backpack and cell phone. The only thing that were missing were her purse that contained her driver's license and credit cards. Police believed she was wearing her Playboy bunny costume when she vanished, as it was not found in her apartment. An analysis of her phone found that she had not made or received any phone calls after she was dropped off. There was no activity on her credit cards. Finally, there was no suspicious activity on her emails. Police and volunteers searched the wooded area near the campus. However, no trace of Cindy was found. Authorities don't believe that she ran off on her own. 2 Britney Spears concert tickets were found in her apartment. A printout for a computer that was due to receipt on November 6th was also found. Her friends and relatives don't believe she was the type of person to just disappear. They also did not believe she was depressed or suicidal. Her friends remembered that she was happy and upbeat on the night she vanished. Authorities believed that Cindy left her apartment to go to a 24-hour supermarket and that she was abducted there or on the way. Another theory was that she left her apartment with someone that she knew and then was killed by them. A few days after she disappeared, a woman matching her description was seen in Philadelphia being forced into a car by an unidentified man. Police do not know who he was or if the woman was her, but they would like to question him. A $27,000 reward is available for this case. To this day, Cindy Song has not been found. Todd McAfee. In the summer of 1986, 26-year-old Todd McAfee became the manager of an isolated 300-acre tomato farm located off State Road 70 near McAfee City, Florida. The farm was owned by the Bonita Packing Company. He lived and had an office in the company trailer on the property. He was a hard worker who loved his job and had extensive knowledge on farming. He was also an avid gun collector and would often target shoot behind his home. It was well known in the area that he kept his valuable gun collection in his trailer. At 6:30 a.m. on the morning of August 18, 1987, the farm's migrant laborers arrived there and were surprised to find that Todd had not unlocked the gate for them. His assistant Adam Williams arrived a few minutes later and had to let them in. He was surprised because Todd would normally open the gate before their arrival. He then noticed Todd's truck parked in the front of his car near the trailer. He thought this was odd, as Todd normally parked it behind his car. By 7 a.m., there was still no sign of Todd. Adam went over to check inside his trailer. He noticed 2 empty handgun cases on the floor. He also noticed that the answering machine's tape was missing. However, the spindles were still spinning. He also noticed that the answering machine's tape was missing. 2 hours later, another farm employee found a bag of groceries in the front seat of Todd's truck. They appeared to have been left overnight. They also found a newly rented videotape. The keys were still in the ignition. Lying in the bed of the pickup truck was Todd's glasses, which were covered in blood. At around the same time, 2 miles away, some of the laborers were looking for water for their overheated truck when they discovered his body. He had been shot 4 times and dumped in a drainage ditch. Investigators determined that Todd had been shot with .22 caliber hollow point bullets. Spatters of blood were found in the sand near his body. This led them to believe that at least 2 people carried his body, placed it in the sand, then picked it up again and placed it in the ditch. Locals knew that the ditch was the home of the 15-foot alligator. It was speculated that the killers had hoped that the alligator would eat the body. However, the body was discovered before this could occur. Footprints were also discovered around the site. All of Todd's employees were interrogated and their shoes videotaped. No matches were found. Along with the bloody glasses, investigators found that the seat of Todd's truck was covered in blood. An empty gun case was also found on the truck's dashboard inside its ransacked trailer. They discovered that his gun collection, which included several handguns, rifles, and shotguns, was missing, along with a VCR and a few cameras. They suspected that he had been killed for his gun collection. A receipt found in the grocery bag of Todd's truck helped pinpoint the time of his death between 6:30 and 7 p.m. At around 6:15 p.m. on the night of August 17th, two of his friends passed by the trailer and noticed an orange van parked next to it. The orange van had been seen earlier at a local gas station. A customer had struck up a conversation with a female occupant of the van. One of the male occupants came out of the store, struck her repeatedly, and then forced her into the van. Another man also entered the van, and the three left. The witness was later put under hypnosis. She was able to give more detailed description of the van and the occupants. Investigators believe that on the night of August 17th, Todd was ambushed by the van's occupants after discovering his trailer was being burglarized. Tire tracks in his driveway showed that he sped up to the trailer, apparently realizing it was burglarized. His gun collection had been stolen the previous year. They believe he was shot and killed as he exited his truck outside of his trailer. They believe he was then placed back in his truck and driven to the ditch where he was dumped. His family has offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the identity of the killers. Arthur Buddy Schumacher. This one does not have a lot of information, so I provide what I can find. Arthur Louis Buddy Schumacher, born in 1916, was an 8-year-old boy from Wisconsin who was found murdered in 1925. The murder had not been solved. He had an older sister, Jeanette Alice, who was born on April 11, 1915, and Buddy attended Lincoln Elementary School in Wisconsin. Schumacher went missing on July 24, 1925. He left his house with some neighborhood boys at about 9 a.m. and never returned. He was last seen by 3 of his friends after they hopped off a freight train they jumped to get a ride to a nearby swimming hole. For 7 weeks, the community and the state searched desperately to find the boy until his body was found just a mile from his house with his clothing torn and a handkerchief shoved down his throat. The police pursued several promising leads, but to no avail. The Hall Mills murder case. Edward Wheeler Hall, a priest, and Eleanor Mills, a member of his choir, and whom he was having an affair with, were murdered on September 14, 1922, in New Jersey, United States. Hall's wife and her brothers were accused of committing the murders, but were acquitted in a 1926 trial. In the history of journalism, the case is largely remembered for the vast extent of newspaper coverage it received nationwide. It has been regarded as an example of a media circus. On September 16, 1922, the body of Eleanor Mills, Edward Hall, were discovered in a field near a farm in New Jersey. Both bodies were on their backs, both shot in the head with a .32 caliber pistol. The man once and the woman 3 times. The bullet entered the man's head over his right ear and exited through the back of his neck. The woman was shot under the right eye, over the right temple, and over the right ear. A police officer at the scene noticed that the woman's throat had been severed and maggots were already in the wound. Indicating that the death occurred at least 24 hours earlier. The bodies appear to have been positioned side by side after death. Both had their feet pointing towards a crabapple tree. The man had a hat covering his face, and his calling card was placed at his feet. Torn up love letters were placed between the bodies. A jurisdictional issue complicated the initial investigation, as the crime scene was near the border between Somerset County and Middlesex County. Middlesex County police arrived first, but the crime scene was actually in Franklin Township, Somerset County. While the authorities addressed the confusion, curiosity seekers trampled the scene, took souvenirs, and passed Hall's calling card around. The physical evidence was thus severely compromised. So very similar to other murder stories, if you look up a lot of them that happened in the early 1900s, you will see that people get curious and will come in and touch potential evidence and could compromise an entire case and make it go cold. The Delphi Murders. On February 14, 2017, the bodies of Abigail Williams and Liberty German were discovered near the Monon High Bridge Trail, which is part of the Delphi Historic Trails in Delphi, Indiana. After the young girls had disappeared from the same trail the previous day, the murders have received significant media coverage because of video and audio recording of an individual believed to be the girls' killer were found on German's smartphone. Despite thousands of tips that have been sent to the police and the circulation of recordings of the suspect, no arrest in the case has been made. Police have not released details on how the girls were murdered. As early as February 15, 2017, Indiana State Police began circulating a still image of an individual reportedly seen on the Monon High Bridge Trail near where the two friends were slain. The grainy photograph appears to capture a Caucasian male, hands in pockets, walking on the rail bridge, heads down, towards the girls. A few days later, the person in the photograph was named the prime suspect in the double homicide. On February 22nd, law enforcement released an audio recording of the voice of the suspect, though in some degree muffled, is heard to say, "Down the hill." It was the news conference. The officials credited the source of the audio and imagery to German's smartphone, and further, regarded her as a hero for having had the presence of mind to fortify the secretly record for the exchange. Police indicated that the additional evidence from the phone had been secured, but they did not release it so as to not compromise any future trial. By this time, the reward in this case was set to $41,000. Investigators revealed they had reason to believe that the suspect might well be hiding in plain sight, and that the person is almost certainly familiar with the area of Delphi, whether it had been from living or working there or for another reason. An additional plea was made for help in identifying the driver of the vehicle left abandoned off the Holster Heartland Highway in Delphi, at the former Child Service Office. To this day, the murder has still not been solved.
Guys. Downhill. Guys. Downhill. Guys. Downhill.
I'm going to totally butcher this, so I apologize. Frauke leaves. On June 20th, 2006, the 21-year-old student nurse Frauke Leeds disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The last known sighting of her was at a pub where she and a friend watched the FIFA World Cup match between England and Sweden. While Leeds was still at the pub, she borrowed a friend's mobile phone battery, as the battery on her own phone had been drained. She later returned her friend's battery before leaving the pub around 11 p.m. Since she probably had no more than €5 with her, she is believed to have been heading home on foot. The pub was about 1.5 kilometers away from her home. At 12:49 a.m., her housemate received a text message from Leeds' mobile phone saying that she would be home later. However, she did not return home that night, and when she also failed to appear to work the day after, her mother reported her missing. The police discovered that the text message had been sent from Neheim, a small city about 35 kilometers northeast of Paderborn. In the following days, Leeds called her housemate 5 times via her mobile phone. Police were unable to locate the calls, which all came from the different industrial areas of Paderborn. During these calls, Leeds continued to say that she would return home soon, but did not communicate any information about her situation. She provided only vague and evasive answers to questions. Leeds' last phone call was on June 27th in the presence of her sister, who also talked to her. During the conversation, she is said to have answered the question of whether she was being held captive with a faint yes, immediately followed by a loud no. Contact broke off after this phone call. On October 4, 2006, Leeds' skeletonized body was found by a hunter in the forested area. The body was found with the clothes she was wearing on the day of her disappearance. Her mobile phone, handbag, wallet, and wristwatch were not found. Due to the condition of the body, the time and cause of Leeds' death cannot be determined. A case analysis by the police came to the conclusion that Leeds was probably held captive in the area around Neheim, and that the phone calls from Paderborn may have been diversionary maneuvers. No motive for her crime has been determined. Over 900 people who were connected with the victim were questioned by the police, and the initial investigation produced a list of 5 initial suspects. All 5 were eventually cleared after producing alibis. To this day, no one knows who captured Leeds, and no one knows why she was murdered. This has been part 1 of GB Scott's Halloween special, The Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. We have gone through sections 1 through 3, and will continue next week with the final 4 sections. So thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I will see you all next week for the final part of this Halloween special as we get deeper and deeper into this iceberg.